again, broad scale, gating item is, what is the feedback from our corporate partners around the demand signal, right? I think so much of climate is you need to understand where solutions are in their kind of techno-economic, cost, like where are they like relative to aggregated demand? Like where is the demand? How deep is the demand pool? Where are solutions on their cost curve relative to the incumbent technology that was dirtier, right? So if you look at like silicon PV, lithium-ion batteries, like that's been the story, right? Is that ultimately these solutions got cheap enough where you can monetize them. So I think the first thing I would say is try to understand where a technology or a solution is in that kind of journey of coming down the cost curve.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zenergy Podcast. I'm your host, Karan and today I'm joined by Pete Schork, principal at Broadscale Group. We kick off with a fun lightning round before diving into Pete's role at Broadscale, how he sources investment opportunities, and their mission, disruption for good. Pete shares insights on balancing impactful investments, examples of successful companies like M-KOPA and Arcadia, and Broadscale's unique corporate partnership model. We discuss key lessons for young investors, what makes climate startups thrive, and soft skills that Pete values in his team. Pete also shares his market predictions, election policy insights, and advice he'd give his younger self. Whether you're new to investing or a seasoned pro, Pete's thoughtful answers will resonate. Enjoy this insightful conversation with Pete Schork. Hello, Pete. It is wonderful to have you on the podcast. Seriously, thank you for taking the time during what I know is a really busy climate week.
My
I
pleasure.
wish I could have made it to the bowling event. I want to hear how you did. And really looking forward to diving into your journey in the space as someone who's been involved and active for over a decade now. That's so exciting, and can't wait to hear all about your experience. But before getting into it, have to start out with a quick lightning round.
Let's go.
Excited to hear your answers here.
Let's go.
We all have a song that gets us pumped. If Broadscale had a theme song, what would it be and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, at Broadscale, we're pretty big Deadheads, actually, Grateful Dead fans. And by that, I mean Andrew Shapiro and I are Deadheads, and the rest of our team is just highly confused what we're talking about at all times. But I think a fitting song would be Touch of Grey, actually, which is it's not really a pump-up song, but it's more of a song about perseverance through adversity. And, I think that's sort of a metaphor for climate, right? Which is that you can find a lot of silver linings, the touch of gray, that's the whole theme of the song, and a lot of
100%.
positivity in what's like a pretty long and, arduous, but ultimately victorious journey. So I think that's sort of the mantra. We will get by. Like, let's keep on trucking. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. And if you could invite any historical figure to join Broadscale for a day, who would it be and what role would they play? Another not easy lightning round question, I must say.
For me, it would probably be Thomas Edison, and just the spirit of invention, but also understanding kind of the early days of the electricity sector. Because I started my career in electricity power investment banking at UBS, right? So that's really like the thread from which my whole career has come, is systems thinking based in the power sector. So someone like Thomas Edison he'd probably be able to explain my entire career before it even unfolds. So I think that'd be a good one.
That's so cool that you're working investment banking in the electricity sector. I feel like that's a very specific and helpful experience in the lead up to transitioning ultimately to Broadscale.
It was cool. It was interesting. So I was doing that around the early 2010s. Right. And so you can imagine it was the early days of utility scale renewables in earnest. The cost of solar PV had just kind of gotten to the point, the cost of wind had gotten to the point where that could be deployed in mass. There was utility renewable portfolio standards that were leading to, large scale procurement of utility scale renewables. But that was about it. And there were inklings of what would become distributed, decentralized digital energy as we know it today, Solar City was pioneering that model. They eventually got merged into Tesla, but it was like super early days, right? And so for me, it was I was straddling two worlds a little bit. It was kind of a dual exposure of, hey, here is this huge, complicated system with all these capital flows and literal electricity flows in real time. But I saw the writing on the wall and knew that we would be moving towards that decentralized, distributed digital future. And I was eager to jump into it. So that's actually how I got joined up with the team at Broadscale, because Andrew Shapiro founded Broadscale in 2012 to bring, those bigger corporations who were in the legacy world into the new world. And so when he and I met, I was like, wait, this is the bridge to the future, effectively. We're building that as a firm. And so we'll get into that more today, but that's really
100%.
that's what we're all about.
And soon we'll get there and look forward to learning about how exactly you got introduced to Andrew.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you saw the writing on the wall because utility scale solar was starting to take off at the time. There were RPO standards.
Yeah.
And also Tesla and Solar City were moving along there.
Yeah.
Specifically, did you feel as if solar would ultimately take a main stage in the electricity mix? And do you feel like the growth over the last 10 years has kind of met your expectation on that front?
Yeah, I love that question. I mean, I think at the time you could have called me like an unequivocal, DG bull. Like I was like, the future is going to be self-production, self-consumption. At the time, everyone was talking about the utility death spiral. And I forget who published it. It might have been Edison Electric Institute as almost a cautionary tale to its members. Like, hey guys, let's be worried about this. If people can produce their own energy off the grid, they're no longer going to be ratepayers. If they're no longer ratepayers, the price of electricity goes up for everybody else. Then that's going to lead to more defections. Then that's going to lead to more people self-consuming. So that was the death spiral that everyone talked about. I think, the rumors of the utilities demise obviously have been exaggerated, right? And so if anything, I think, utility scale has come along maybe even more than I would have thought. I think that's been driven by utilities in large part. I think DG still has a long way to go, but I'm kind of a cautionary bull at this point. Not a full bull.
What do you think is needed to facilitate that growth in DG?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think better compensation for distributed energy assets and rate regimes around that, and more of a clear market signal, I think, is required. I also think, there's a lot of companies, if you look at just kind of the venture-backed ecosystem, that are trying to clarify the benefits to adopting solar and DG. And so we're investors in one of those companies, Arcadia, right, which has a rate engine.
Just going to ask about.
Yeah, exactly. That helps power and clarify, the benefit to the customer of adopting solar. But the problem is, and I've been talking to a lot of entrepreneurs about this, the problem is it's fundamentally still very much a push market. In other parts of the world, in Europe, et cetera, it's a pull market. So the customer really understands it, and it's socially more kind of in vogue to be a solar or self-consumer. I mean, if you look at Germany and adoption rates around self-production and just kind of the awareness, and it's helped by energy prices, right? The States, we just don't have that culture yet. So I think it's a cultural revolution, but it's also a market structure revolution. Yeah.
Got it. Thanks for expanding on that.
Yeah,
usually I don't go so deep into a topic up front, but I had to transition from the song to DG. Now we'll go back to your work at Broadscale.
Let's do it, man.
So you said you met Andrew early on, and were inspired because he was essentially trying to bring in a lot of legacy players into this newly growing space. What did that first conversation with Andrew look like? And what was going on in your head entering that conversation?
Yeah, look, I think it's the first conversation that most people have with Andrew, which is, sort of past his prologue a little bit. So he had this firm called Green Order in the 2000s that helped GE create Eco-Imagination. He helped GM create the Chevy Volt, right? So these very big kind of landmark business initiatives, strategic initiatives for these Fortune 500s. And so I was impressed by the ability of Green Order to get these large corporations to move. It's so hard to get large corporations to move, right? And so Broadscale's mission is effectively, so we're an investment and advisory firm. The advisory piece, we get large corporations to move in the right direction, right, towards the energy transition. And then we invest with them and source deals for them to invest directly. So it's a unique model, it's deal by deal. And so, the first conversation with Andrew it was now about a year and a half into starting the firm. And I was really brought on to help build out our investment practice, because at that point in time, we had this great network, a bunch of leading global utilities, the likes of Duke Energy, National Grid, brought in some OEMs, Panasonic, GE, SK, but we hadn't invested yet. So there was this opportunity to build our own pool of capital around that. And so our first conversation was, I think we got pretty far down the track. We were like, look, we see the opportunity here to, really capture some of that value between the new emerging companies and the legacy players. And there's an opportunity to deploy capital into that. So that's what we were talking about.
Smart of Andrew to bring in the big guns in the form of Pete to build out the investment practice.
Yeah.
What were some first steps?
I was a small gun at the time. I don't know if I'm a big gun yet, but that's hilarious.
How did you ultimately start sourcing investment opportunities?
Yeah. So part of what I think is great about this strategic network is we like to call it sometimes a fly trap, because there is a lot of value for any of these companies from a sourcing perspective. I mean, they have all of their own global R&D centers, many of them, right? Where they're, if you're an E&P player, an oil and gas player, you're researching, say, SAF pathways, right? Or, different kind of hydrogen infrastructure opportunities. So what we're able to do basically is we're able to kind of bring in and aggregate all of those insights, and then we're able to share them with the member firms. Getting that engine started actually wasn't that hard. It was interesting. Like in 2014, 2015, the climate deals universe was as simple. I used to joke, you could open up Green Tech Media and tab through every tab from the last few months within a matter of 20 minutes.
Wow.
So it was, everybody kind of knew everybody, and it was very much an easy universe to wrap your head around. Now, if you read, CTVC or Sightline,
it's a new deal.
I mean, it's going to take you the whole day to read it, right? So now we're at the point where you can't fully keep up. But the way that we filter is very much around the corporates.
Got it. You touched upon this somewhat. Broadscale's mission is disruption for good. How do you balance the disruption part with ensuring that it drives positive outcomes? Because in a way, there aren't other case studies for a lot of the technologies that Broadscale ultimately invests in. And building off of that, are there any standout moments when you saw this mission in action and thought, this is exactly what we're here to do?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, our whole thesis is that these two things, positive impact on society, financial returns, they're not inherently in opposition, right? There's a lot of things in the middle of that Venn diagram. It's kind of fatter than you might realize, right? So one of the reasons why I like our approach and our thesis is we have this corporate network. It's very focused on the energy transition, but we're not dogmatic as investors. So we're not just investing in the energy transition. So one of our best performing companies is called M-KOPA, which is actually started as an energy transition company.
Mentioning all the companies I was going to ask you
about.
Look,
we're it's as if I hacked your computer and got the Cliffs Notes, right? So, brilliant company, kind of fascinating, and kind of a quintessential Broadscale company, because started as an energy transition company, providing off-grid solar in sub-Saharan Africa. But then leveraging that customer base, and they got to about 1 million customers, I would say, in their first 10 years. They were founded in the early 2010s. Leveraging that customer base, they started to realize, hey, there's an opportunity to really empower the base of the pyramid customer in sub-Saharan Africa with new products beyond merely solar, which is an incredibly, incredibly powerful product as it is. So what they had was an integrated solar lamp with battery that would basically remove the need for a family member to, spend half their day walking to and buying kerosene, lugging it back, for oil kind of fired, heating and lighting, right, in the home. So that in and of itself was incredibly disruptive. But then the company's founder, Jesse Moore, was like, wait a second, we have this great customer base. We've already empowered them in this way. They have a battery, by the way. What can you do with a battery? Well, you can power everything. You can power a whole home, phone charging, refrigerators, appliances of all kind. So then they decided to start offering, in about 3 or 4 years ago, smartphones. And the smartphone becomes then this tool of economic empowerment, because with smartphones, you can then be connected to the banking system for the first time if you're in sub-Saharan Africa. So you effectively leapfrog the need to have traditional telephony, computers, banking. So now they've gone from 1 million customers to they just crossed the 5 million customer mark, which is pretty tremendous.
That's tremendous.
They're reaching that kind of hyperscale. They're providing banking, they're providing health insurance, they're providing access to clean mobility. So we love that because it tells this story of disruption for good, right? It's this is an energy transition company. Don't get it twisted, but it also has all these other benefits that I think speak to highly benefits.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
And sticking with this example for a second, how did the opportunity to invest in M-KOPA ultimately arise?
Yeah.
And what role did Broadscale play in helping its growth?
Yeah, great question. So, Andrew will have to be honest if I get this twisted, because he was on the ground floor of this one, but we knew one of the longtime investors in the company, Generation Investment Management, quite well, and so they were an existing investor on the cap table. And then our entry point in investing in the company 3 years ago was we co-led around with Generation. So that was one where, we knew the company from afar. We had been studying the DG solar, off-grid solar opportunity in sub-Saharan Africa. We were familiar with D-Light and, Sunfunder and firms that were kind of around that ecosystem. We had talked to them. But really it was that paired with familiarity and close relationship on Andrew's part with Generation to really collaborate around a great opportunity and a great team where it all came together.
Got it. Same question for Arcadia.
Yeah. For that one, this is an interesting story. So Karan had presented to our corporate network, I forget when, it was like, in 2018 maybe.
He actually spoke at a conference that I recently helped organize.
Yeah?
Yeah,
he's
dynamic.
Great. Incredible speaker, right? So that much was clear in 2018, of course. But at the time, they were a community solar aggregator only. They hadn't launched ARC. They hadn't done any of this kind of, Cambrian explosion around energy data thesis, which we love so much. And it was early days in that market. And, historically, we can talk more about our model. Historically, we've been investing Series B and later. Just recently, we started to invest all the way down to seed. So at the time, he was a little bit early and the market was a little bit early. Fast forward a couple of years, we reconnected. They were launching ARC, and we just got so excited about, the energy data thesis of the fact that, say, any vendor or any kind of firm wanting to sell into this new clean energy economy needs access to all of this rate data, right? And, the utilities have effectively had a monopoly on that data. It's not their core competency to unlock that data. So the idea of a standalone firm that would be, unlocking that data, 1, 2, monetizing it through APIs and really a SaaS-based approach, we got super excited about that. But I think what I'd emphasize is the original entree point was when he presented to our corporate network. So it kind of shows how these two parts of our model and approach are really complementary. Yeah.
So interesting.
And one other thing I'll add is actually Equinor, who's a corporate partner of ours, invested in Arcadia through us as part of our investment as well. So we have this flexibility because we're deal by deal. Maybe that's a good segue to share a little more on how that works.
Yeah, I was actually about to ask, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so we've got 100. So most of our capital is from family offices. We've got about 160 some odd family offices that we work with. We've invested about $200 million with those family offices. We then also, for any given opportunity that we do, we'll bring it to our corporate network, and they have the ability to invest directly or invest through us, depending on, is the opportunity wildly oversubscribed? Is it off market? in those instances where it's a very kind of closely held proprietary opportunity, we'll kind of offer the opportunity to commingle between the corporates and our family office. But usually for our corporations, and we bring them opportunities every month, we let them just invest direct. The whole model is to give them deal flow, and that's usually the model in which they invest. So what the strategics like about it is it's entirely, opt-in. So it's not a blind pool fund. They don't have this mandated exposure to what we decide at the investment committee. There's no dogma. They get the benefit of all of this flow, and then they can opt in. So we have these two parallel capital sources, and that's sort of how they work together.
And I sort of have a sense of some of the benefits that partnering with the corporates brings to Broadscale. But in that example where the corporates essentially invest directly, and then also to clarify, are the family offices essentially the LP here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah. So
what are the benefits to us
from having bringing the sourcing opportunities for corporates, and having them directly invest? I mean, of course, there are probably like reputational benefits for you, and sometimes they probably bring you opportunities. Also, you're just doing some good service in the space. I'd love to hear exactly how you look at it.
Well, it's our entire theory of change, really, actually, which is we were founded as a response almost to Climate Tech 1.0, which was capital and interest in climate was insufficient, like Kleiner backing up the truck as they did, kind of all the firms, Coastal, all the firms that did Climate Tech 1.0, having a really strong thesis and being really enthusiastic and throwing a lot of capital at the problem, like that was insufficient to scale climate solutions. So we've always said that capital is important but insufficient. Corporate partnerships and relationships that drive revenue, that can drive technology partnerships and collaborations, that can drive distribution, that can drive scale, are ultimately required to scaling climate solutions. So actually, I think like for us, it's the real crux of what we do is, we work with those corporate partners, sure, to source deals, to do diligence, but it's really post-close where I think those relationships are invaluable. And we really only invest in companies where we feel like the corporate relationships that we have could help with distribution, could help with scale. So it's really kind of an end-to-end solution and intervention. We get to it.
That's a very interesting model.
It's pretty unique. I mean, most people say, "Hey, I haven't really seen anything like that," which I think
this reminds me. I'm trying to think. That's exactly what I was like. I was trying to think of other firms in the space, and I've interviewed like a decent amount of VCs and other investors just through the podcast. But I'm really struggling to figure out. Like usually, for example, corporates have their own specific
CVCs,
venture arm, like Siemens, for example, or Schneider.
Oh yeah, and we work with those, by the way. Like, so we work very closely with Equinor Ventures. I mentioned them. We work very closely with Shell Ventures. But I think part of what we're doing though is we're connecting not just to that part of the org, but also, the C-suite, also to the business unit for any given opportunity, right? And so that's how you can kind of. Part of this exercise is helping the venturing orgs with their own connectivity within themselves. I mean, it's kind of within their own companies to other parts of the company. It's kind of funny, right?
So what teams directly are you engaging with at the corporates largely? I know you just said that you engage with several, but like, is there usually a specific POC at the corporates?
Yeah. Usually it's a global head of ventures. But that frequently leads us to be working with global head of strategy, and actually in one of these firms, and I won't go into the specifics, we're dealing with the global CEO of effectively a $30 billion company.
I see.
Yeah,
I see. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
And moving on, because the venture world investing can get like pretty technical really quickly.
Yeah.
And there's a diverse group of people who view these podcasts, ranging from people who have been in the space for a long time, people who are just like looking to get started. So honing in on the people who are just looking to learn about climate and investing, if you could explain what and how you evaluate new investments to that group. Like, what are the key criteria?
Just breaking in.
And like what skills they should try and develop to be able to be effective investors.
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is, keep going. Like, I'm glad you're interested in the space. Lean in. It's so much fun. I really think we have like one of the best jobs there is, because you're being compensated to learn. And the more you learn and the more pattern recognition you can draw, the better you get. And so it's like knowledge begets knowledge, and experience begets, competence. So, I think for us, again, broad scale, gating item is, what is the feedback from our corporate partners around the demand signal, right? I think so much of climate is you need to understand where solutions are in their kind of techno-economic, cost, like where are they like relative to aggregated demand? Like, where is the demand? How deep is the demand pool? Where are solutions on their cost curve relative to the incumbent technology that was dirtier, right? So if you look at like silicon PV, lithium-ion batteries, like that's been the story, right? Is that ultimately these solutions got cheap enough where you can monetize them. So I think the first thing I would say is try to understand where a technology or a solution is in that kind of journey of coming down the cost curve. If it's probably at this point, an adjunct solution that is like, say, a software layer, like, we were just talking about your business, which is focused on, the solar space, right? Like, if you are a solution that is providing, say, O&M or software or something that's sitting on top of that kind of cost out story, okay, understanding what the competitive landscape is and what the rate of adoption and what the market penetration of those types of solutions is really important. Because like at this point in time, for example, just to hit on one space, maybe unfairly, I would not recommend launching a software solution to help monetize IRA incentives in the residential environment. I've seen probably 15 companies trying to do that, right? So if you're trying to invest in or start a company, knowing kind of where you are, not only in the underlying technology adoption cycle and where those cost curves are at, but also understanding where all those sort of competitive solutions are, I think that's really important. If you've done those two things, and maybe those are gating items, then I think team is really like, maybe team is number one, right? I think it is number one, not maybe. But I would turn to team as well, because ideas are dime a dozen, but execution is just so incredibly important. And you've seen so many times, and I also do a lot of SaaS kind of angel investing. You've seen so many times teams that were, say, 24 months behind in that adoption cycle lap a team that was, there on day one just from superior execution. So that's really important as well.
Amazing. And to help someone go from a small gun investor to a big gun investor, when evaluating early stage companies, are there any red flags or warning signs young investors should be mindful of, especially in high risk and new fields?
There's a lot. I think, in our space, like, I do think, you need to understand the quantum of capital, the amount of capital that's required to get something, like below price parity with the incumbent solution, right? Like, that is just a journey that's so like on the one hand, I am so incredibly grateful for the billions of dollars that have entered climate tech VC in the last 2, 3, 4 years. On the other hand, I do see that we are backing some solutions that I think are fundamentally too early for that adoption cycle we were just talking about, right? Or where that quantum of capital, the amount of capital required to bring things below cost parity with the incumbent solution it's just too magnificent at this point in time, right? And so what we're seeing, there's a lot of conversation. You've probably heard it all week, because I know this is like one of 15 interviews you're doing, right? The missing middle is something that a lot of people are talking about, right? So if Broadscale, we're a growth or Series B investor, why would we want to put in a marginal dollar if we expect that we're going to need like 20 Broadscales in order to bring something through to an eventual exit event or an IPO, right? So I think a red flag is really what's the capital intensity, and some solutions are on one side of that equation where it is achievable. We can crowd in, LPO dollars. We can crowd in philanthropic dollars. We can get to the needed cost out on the unit economics to unlock that willingness to pay on the enterprise side. And some things are just a little bit too moonshotty. So I think just really knowing where you are on that spectrum is really important.
Shifting gears a little bit from the investor side to the entrepreneurship side.
Sure.
As you've probably seen in your over a decade of experience in the climate space, some companies rise, but others fortunately fall. What do you feel is the magic ingredient that helps climate startups thrive?
Yeah. Well, we've touched on a lot of these topics. I mean, it's, I do think it is like timing. It's really important. I think it is team. One of the things that when I first started Broadscale, one of the things we were obsessed with, and we're still frankly obsessed with, we just don't talk about it as much, is business model innovation. Mm-hmm. Like I actually think business model innovation has been a key unlock for more startups than you think about. And the example that we love to point to was, the no money down kind of solar lease model, mm-hmm. right? Lease PPA, right? That was critical for unlocking what we were talking about earlier with Sunrun, Solar City, then Tesla, and the other players in the solar DG space. So I think the solutions and teams that won, they had the right market timing. So things got below price parity that we were talking about, but frequently they weren't yet on a capital dollar out the wallet basis, but they were on a finance basis. So that's why we at Broadscale invested in Generate Capital. We saw this story enough times. Andrew knew Scott Jacobs, and then he was like, "This is a no-brainer. Here's a solution that's bringing that business model innovation to every company in the space. Okay, we need that, right?" And so that's what Generate fundamentally does is they help plug power, lease hydrogen power forklifts. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to Walmart, to an end customer, right? So we love that. We think that that's a key part of almost every successful climate story, and it helps pull the future forward a little bit.
During that very uncertain period in a startup entrepreneur's journey, where let's say price parity is getting close but not exactly there.
Yeah.
How important is resilience? Which is kind of a broad question, but to be more specific, how do you evaluate a startup's ability to pivot or adapt when things might not go as planned?
Yeah.
And there is potential to reach that parity, but might not necessarily get there. So how do you think about
that's a great question.
Pivoting when you work with the companies that you ultimately invest in?
Yeah, look, I think we've witnessed some good pivots, actually, some world-class pivots. So one, no, seriously. And I actually was thinking about this today, actually. So I'm glad you brought it up. The best pivot that I've ever seen was Via, which is a company of ours at Broadscale that does transit tech. So they offer software and transit services to cities and municipalities globally for microtransit, sort of where it doesn't make sense to run a full bus line, right? And so their cost per mile is cheaper than, rolling out a full bus line for a route that might be less utilized or might be a special route like paratransit. But that wasn't always the company. They've scaled this to a multi-$100 million ARR business, but the original company was built around route optimization and rideshare. So think Uber Pool, and their most successful route was on the Upper East Side, globally, right? So you kind of have, relatively well-to-do customer base using this very high-tech software solution to do a consumer service. They've completely pivoted the entire business to basically what's sort of GovTech, public good transit service, working with cities like Arlington, Jersey City. They power New York City's public transit, school bus systems, tracking so parents can know where their students are. Like how you get there from kind of helping people get to work on, in a metro span on the East Side. Like you can see how you get there, but that was an incredible pivot to basically look at the unit economics of that prior business and say, hey, that's not really working out. Where is there an alignment of demand for the tech that we've already created and kind of our right to win? So I credit like Daniel Remote, the founder of that business, with pulling that off. I think it's one of the best pivots I've ever seen because they basically took a business that was already over in the hundreds of millions of scale, kind of ramped it down, ramped up another business that's doing very, very well, multi-$100 million of scale. But it just gets back to the founder. I personally don't know how you screen for that.
Yeah.
Other than just backing incredible teams, because it's ultimately on the agility of the team to execute and move quickly to pull something like that off. But you can't predict all these things. There's so many good examples we can go into. We probably don't have enough time, but I'd love to just sidebar with you on just that topic.
On
I think
the
it's
team
an incredible
front, though, what are like the soft skills that you look for? Like how do you evaluate if the team is a strong, high potential team?
Yeah, we talk about this concept of like founder market fit. Like I think there are founders that have like a right to win in a space, and there's founders that don't, right? And that can be technical capability. It can be an incredible Rolodex and network in a space where, you really believe that they have the ability to sell into that space because they know that space, they know people in that space, they know the market structure in that space. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it is sort of qualitatives like that. It's like, it's one of the most like kind of je ne sais quoi, it's like finger in the air part of the job that I think it honestly it differentiates good entrepreneurs from, or rather good from great. And I think it does the same for venture investors. I think it's the venture investors that know how to screen forth some of those qualitatives the right way that separate the okay venture investors from the legendary ones.
So do you feel it's more intuition, or is it like observing past experiences? Like I know it's probably varies across investor, but what's your process here?
This part of it is more art than science. I think it's from the conversations early on with a builder, and so now we're talking like also like maybe pre-seed through A, where you have less data, especially pre-seed seed. By A, you have over, hopefully, depending on the company, 1 million in ARR, so you can actually underwrite to traction. But like at pre-seed and seed, you're really, and especially if it's a first-time founder, you're really like you're in a partnership in the engine room at the earliest days around what's the vision, how big could this be, like what are your values, like are you a culture carrier, like can you define, like can you set the tone for a team, can you hire somewhat. Do you have incredibly high standards for hiring? Because like it's sort of like cell division at the early stages, right? It's like you as a founder hire people who then hire other people. So like that needs to all kind of you need to have incredibly high standards. And the best founders, you kind of hate to say it, they hire slowly, they fire quickly, because like the number one thing you need to maintain is just, again, that culture of execution, right? So I think those are some of the things that you can kind of drill into. The part that gets back to my job, though, that I think is really fun, that is actually more fundamental, is like you can study a market for a long time and build a thesis and then be sort of lying in wait. And I love to do that. And then the right founder who has all those qualities comes along. And then your underwriting cycle could be like 4 or 5 days where you're like, I know this market. I've been waiting for this type of founder. Okay, they came along. Like now is the time to really back up the truck. So
what are some markets you really have your eye on right now?
I think the climate grant and like capital stack opportunity is, writ large, is still really nascent, right? Like let me explain. Like I think if you're a project developer in climate, until very recently, there weren't many solutions for accessing the capital that you need throughout your capital stack in a streamlined way. Sure, Generate Capital exists. They're great and they play a really key role, but you didn't have, until Crux came along, you didn't have tax credit transferability. You still don't really have very good fidelity around available grant opportunities as a founder. So I'm an angel investor in a couple companies that are trying to address that. I'm an angel investor in a company called Scout Climate, which is helping with grant discovery. I'm an angel investor in a company called Enduring Planet, which is helping when you win that grant to finance it.
Wait, Dimitri's literally on this podcast next.
Is he going to walk in the door?
Yeah.
He and I are getting coffee tomorrow morning. Yeah, we should have just done the three of us, right? So, dude, case in point, I think that's a really timely thing because right now, the ecosystem's just been evolving so quickly. There's these funding sources, especially post-IRA, that didn't used to exist. Now we need the software layer and sort of what's traditionally like a venture-backed universe kind of thing to come along to help the founder tap into that and access that.
Last technical question, and then we'll wrap up here. And grateful for all of your time.
This has been fun.
This has been a great conversation.
Yeah,
I've learned so much.
Yeah,
it's clear that you have so much knowledge about the investment side and just climate more generally.
Thanks a lot.
So appreciate you sharing all of your insights.
Yeah.
Right now, and I've been asking a lot of people this question just because I feel like it's a really important time in the policy space as it pertains to climate.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of uncertainty with the election cycle coming up. We're a few years into major legislation having been passed, and just love to get your quick thoughts on how you're looking at the current landscape as it pertains to the policy side.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's challenging, right? Because I think we have been, as a sector, to just kind of lean back into observations from the last 10 years, we have been sort of on a short leash multiple times, right? It was first the ITC, right, which was going to be stepped down, and then for a while was at risk of not being renewed. Like it was renewed, right? But there was a lot of uncertainty when that was happening. It was 4 or 5 years ago. Now we have a situation where we finally pass a comprehensive tax package that solved for that, the IRA, that now feels like it may be under risk in an election cycle, right? And so that's creating uncertainty in the market. So what's bad for markets? Uncertainty, right? So that is a concern. I think a mitigant is that, and you've probably heard this all week, there have been a lot of green jobs created in places where people did not think green jobs would exist.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the manufacturing commitments from the likes of SK in the Southeast and others, we are starting to become a green powerhouse, really for the first time in our history. We're starting to manufacture in ways at scale, especially in the battery and critical minerals value chain, in ways and in areas that have not benefited from this energy transition to date. I think that is a mitigant. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that green jobs will remain a bipartisan kind of win for everybody. But look, I think the future is a little bit unwritten. It's a really important election cycle. I think it's a really important signal for VCs like myself to say, hey, we should be leaning in these areas or not. We're definitely bought in on the long-term transition, but back to the point I was making earlier around where are you in the market cycle? I think certain outcome that we all know, right? That's possible in this federal election could set things back a little bit. So we'll see.
Great. Appreciate you answering that. And to wrap up here, if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to Pete as he was entering UBS as a young investment banker, reflecting through the lens of your career, realizing where you're at now, and all of the impactful things that you've done in this space since, what is one piece of career advice that you would give young Pete?
I don't know, like stay the course. It's like maybe have more fun, you know?
Uh-huh.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for fun and joy in this job. You do have to work hard, but I think like it usually works out. You got to follow your inspiration. Maybe we kind of started on the dead. We could kind of end on the dead.
Yes,
if you want
to say.
So
concerts.
Exactly. So one of my favorite Dead songs is Terrapin Station, and the opening line is or there's this part where they're like, "Let my inspiration flow," right? And then inspiration move me lightly. So it's all about just following your inspiration. I think like I would say trust the process, trust your inspiration. It's gotten me it's brought a lot of joy to date, and I'm excited to see where all of us collectively can go. And I think also there's a lot of really positive things that happen that you couldn't have predicted. I could have never predicted the kind of awesome community that exists in our sector now. I mean,
100%.
How many people have you interviewed? You said like
115 this week, 15. But yeah,
there weren't that many people in the sector when I started in the sector.
On this point. Yeah, it's actually been so incredible how warm and welcoming people are in this space, and how willing they are to share their time and insights and just like mentor people in this field. I feel like that's just like I feel like that's a great sign that the industry is destined for like really good things.
I think so. There's a real willingness to pay it forward. So appreciate all that you're doing to help set that up as well.
Well, following your footsteps. And thank you again, Pete. This has been an epic conversation. I personally learned so much, and I know a lot of people listening will get a ton from this conversation. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thanks so much for checking out the Zenergy Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate and subscribe to the podcast. It would mean so much to me and the rest of the team. We release episodes every Thursday, so stay tuned for all new episodes featuring industry leaders building a cleaner, greener future for us all. See you next time.